and special interest is a term that gets thrown around a lot, but these are behind the scenes, and these are animal rights, and this is ballot box biology at its finest, and it's occurring on a regular basis in states around us, and we're unfortunately starting to see it here.
So we're seeing an erosion.
And we're at the forefront of that.
We're seeing a total erosion of this like respect for game managers, scientists making these decisions, and politicians inserting themselves from both political parties. I know when you're
kind of sounds like special interest.
Yeah.
This is the Voice for the Wild podcast, a production of the Idaho Wildlife Federation, where we share stories of Idaho's wild game species, wild places, and of course the wild people at the core of the almost 90-year history of enhancing and conserving Idaho's sporting tradition.
Hey everybody, we're back. It's a Voice for the Wild podcast brought to you by the Idaho Wildlife Federation. I'm Daniel Ritz. I do communications here, and once again, I am joined by my almost twin, Brian Brooks.
Howdy.
Our executive director. Last episode, we introduced kind of the general idea of IWF and the general layout of the podcast. And we talked about how it's less of the nuts and bolts and the news and the same things that you will get from our other channels and platforms, and more of the stories, the behind the scenes, and really a lot of context on the wild game species, the wild places, and yes, the wild people. There are plenty of them that are a part of our hunting and fishing world. Right out of the gate, we're going to add another one of those P's. We're going to add a fourth element, which is something that Brian and I and our team have been spending a lot of time on recently, and that we do every year. We expound upon it at length, and I think it's something that's worth diving into, both in the contemporary space of what's happening right now, 2024, and what has sort of historically been our role, and that is the Idaho legislature and legislature as a whole. So, Brian, if you could, can you give us a top-level view of IWF's role in the State House, meaning kind of what is the place that IWF holds in this conservation space, and how does that play into our general legislative process? Why don't we start there? What are you doing every year over there?
Excuse me. So the legislative session every year, not all states have that. They might do every 2 years, or every off year they'll do like a budget setting only where they don't pass like laws or bills. Idaho Wildlife Federation is the only full-time sportsman voice in the legislative session. That's not to discount some of our partners, of course, but like, a lot of the other groups that might share space with us, may be volunteer, or they work on other things that are not related to natural resources, but we only look at these issues through that lens.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. And we have partners that work with us, like the Nature Conservancy or Trout Unlimited or the Conservation League, Conservation Voters. I mean, we all share like some, there's overlap in our interests, but sometimes we disagree with each other.
Sure.
But we, like I said, that is our niche exclusively. And we really work hard to be a conduit between decision makers, legislators, and the governor's office. Can't forget them, because they also, they sign off on bills that the legislature passes. We're the conduit between the elected body and our constituents, which is largely hunters and anglers. And so we try to relay what is happening in the State House, because that is our day job. And while all of our supporters are working at their day job, they can't pay attention to all this stuff. And things move real fast in the legislature. So it keeps us, this is our overtime part of the year. I mean, we are working 5 days a week, sometimes 7 to 7.
I call spring my desk driving season.
Yeah.
It's when you're actually working what's happening underneath your feet that day.
Yeah. I mean, bills pop up. You get sometimes 12 hours notification. I check bills every night at 9 p.m. for the agendas for the next day at 9 p.m. because that's when what's going to come up on the docket the next day. So like that is our job, while other folks who have a vested interest in what might happen that impacts hunting and fishing are kind of doing their job, right? So we're a conduit. What's happening in the legislature? Hey, sportsmen, this is what's happening. But we're a conduit the other way too. If there's a bill that comes up, we talk about this with hunters and anglers. We get their opinions. We talk to our affiliates. We talk to our board. We get sort of like, how the positives, negatives, unintended consequences of pieces of legislation. And then we deliver those messages or those opinions, voices to our elected officials. And sometimes it's just education, but other times it's also direct lobbying. Like we are saying, do not vote for this or do vote for this. So we lobby as well. And I know that that's kind of a dirty word, lobbyists. Like, everybody hates lobbyists, but I have to do it for our job. It's
Sure.
kind of believe me, I'd much rather not have to be in the state legislature. There's so many things that are not natural resource related. There's politics, and right now politics are really ugly. And that's that's a national condition right at the moment.
Sure.
And so, it's not always fun, and it can be mean. And so it's not something I'd like to do, but frankly, it's our issues, our ability to hunt, fish and wildlife populations, healthy habitat, clean water, public lands, their existence, access to them. All of those things can be enhanced or threatened via the state legislature. And so we have to be there to stand up for hunters and anglers.
Yeah, it's a tough sell, right? Because a lot of us go hunting and fishing to kind of get out of that shit show and that daily cycle, to escape a little bit.
Doing this work, I am cursed because I think you are too. People who work for this, like when I go hunting and fishing, other people go hunting and fishing, they don't want to talk about politics. They don't want to think about the legislature. Their eyes roll in the back of their head. But like, I think we're cursed because when we go hunting and fishing, it's all we can think about.
Yeah. I'm sure it's obnoxious to other people. You know what I mean? I always laugh when people send me, Instagram videos or something of like, look at this, fill in the blank. And we're just like, you wouldn't believe how threatened that is, or we won't be able to do that anymore. Or, total like a buzzkill. But
they want to shut the water off to the South Fork of the Boise to build blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, people are like, I just want to have a,
I was just trying to send, I just wanted you to hit that, smash the like button,
Yeah.
I like to think of it as we do the work so that we don't have to think about it while we're out there, so that we can kind of spend our time. And I'm very grateful. I know that you are, we all are grateful that this is how we get to spend our every day. This is our day job.
It's a privilege. Yeah.
It's a privilege for us to be able to work towards the weekend. We're not working for the weekend. We are working to ensure the quality of that time that we have away. And that's kind of our whole cycle, right? I know that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah. It was my sincere wish that the people listening to this, people who want good hunting and fishing in Idaho, never have to think about politics until we ask them to pay attention and to take action on something that's important. I hope that they can maintain that as much as possible.
And we work pretty hard to make sure that when we are reaching out, and then when we let you know, when we call them action alerts, when we let you know that like, this is the time and space for sportsmen to get engaged, and then we need you to come to the table. We try not to offer that ad nauseum and try to make them really dialed into what is the highest priority. I think we really boil those down. I'd love to talk a little bit with you about, a lot of these issues are big and complex. And before we get into specifically what they are, I think the general consensus is that these issues are huge. How can one person really kind of influence any of these policies? Mm-hmm. If we could first walk me through the life of a bill, because I think that's like
a Schoolhouse Rock,
Civics 101. Walk me through a bill that would be, come up with a hypothetical, or we can use one that's happening right now. And then I would love for you to specifically point out those points of public engagement and the opportunities for sportsmen to have their voice be heard.
Yeah. Well, Daniel, a bill first starts out as an idea that's put on paper. And in Idaho legislature, it works like this. A legislature wants to fix something or get rid of existing Idaho code. Code means laws, and they're on the Idaho books. And they go to legislative services, which is an office in the Capitol, and they put it on a routing slip.
An RS.
And it gives a little identification number, and a legislator will take that to the appropriate committee, And in our case, primarily those committees are the Senate Natural Resource Committee and the House Resources and Environment Committee. Fish and Wildlife tend to travel mostly through those two committees.
And at this point, we only know loosely what the topics are that they're going to be. That RS only has, like, think of it as the subject.
Yeah. And well, in RS, and it's sort of like proprietary information. Like, it's not public. It's not posted on the website, the legislative website. It is owned by the author, the legislator. And I have been asked, like, when these things leak, like, I've gotten my hands on some things, I'll go talk to the bill's sponsor before it's even a bill. It's just an RS. And they're like, how did you get this? And, I'm not going to kiss and tell.
Don't ever.
Yeah. I mean, information is currency in that building. So anyways, it's an RS. And it does have, like, it's exactly what the bill will look like, but it's private information. So then they go to a print hearing, and it's basically, there's no real discussion or debate on the bill. It's a presentation. Here's what it does at a very high level. Here's just the idea of it, and then the committee votes to print it, which essentially transfers it from an RS to a bill, and then it's assigned. So if they vote yes, it goes back to legislative services. It is given a bill number. Then it exists in the public forum, and that's when, like, the majority of the work starts. That's when a person of John Q. Public can go and start lobbying to say, like, usually you go talk to the bill sponsor and be like, if it's a bad bill, we just say, like, what are you thinking with this? Here's our concerns with it, blah, blah, blah. Things can happen very fast simultaneously. So we do that. Idaho Wildlife Federation does that. But at the same time, we try to let our partners, like our affiliates, know, while at the same time trying to disseminate this information to the general public. So we'll put out an email, we'll put out it'll be in my legislative updates, it'll be on social media.
The bill tracker that we have on the website there.
Yep. And so we're starting to tell people, like, yeah, we have some concerns about this. And then as we talk to more partners, more affiliates, we might learn things we didn't know before, other legislators, and then we're starting to actively, like, lobby or at least educate. And there's a difference between lobbying and educating, like, legally. Lobbying is when you're asking a legislator to take a position one way or another on a piece of legislation. Mostly it's like, hey, here's this bill. We have concerns with it. Until I actually ask them to take a position, it's not really considered lobbying. But so you're gathering information, but that basically, the whistle starts right when it becomes a bill, and to the point where it's introduced, it gets its proper introduction. And in a state like Idaho, you got to do almost all of your lobbying before it gets introduced. Once it's introduced, people usually have been lobbied pretty heavily. Their minds are pretty made up. It's almost like performatory at that point, because that's when the bill sponsor comes up and says, here is the actual language. Legislators are not reading it for the first time at this thing. They're like, oh, wow, here's some interesting, I have some points here. Like, they already have their questions loaded up. Sometimes we can give those questions to legislators, like, this guy should be answering this in a public way. And that's when, and that's public to attend. And that's when, so you can come in and sit in on those. You can watch online. We will always be there. And that's when you can actually go up and testify as well.
I think it's super important to just, like, recognize that a majority, most years, thankfully, the majority of the work that we're doing is occurring in between that rumor of an RS and we will personally approach legislators so that they are not presented. In essence, I'm saying that the most important work that we're doing is making sure that you, John Q. Public, never have to deal with bad bills in the public forum.
It's me asking, can you please not?
Just bury this, put it back in the drawer.
Or like, here's a modification. And that's the other thing too, is there's a lot of ownership that comes with bills. And there's a bill this year that is a good public access bill. The intent is good, but I had some concerns where there's some ambiguity in the language. And this is a bill that would basically, like, we can talk about it really fast before we
introduce it, and let's get back to why don't we get back into what's happening right here. But, like, for an example,
it's a public access bill. It would, if counties wanted to vacate or, like, ditch or sell a piece, an access point to a body of water or to federal or state land, the counties have to first prove that you can get access to those parcels or that body of water by some other route. And if they can't prove that, then they would be forced to build identical access to that body of water, to that state or federal parcel. And if they can't do that for a number of reasons, whether it's not feasible financially or like the topography, they can't build that exact same, then they can't abandon that road. That's good. That maintains access, and it gives counties the ability to kind of fend away the Trident LLCs, the Wilkes brothers, who will be like, I will bury you or I will buy this. So it would give them some like legal say like, well, we can't sell you this unless you build the road or unless something like that. It's a good bill, but there was some ambiguity in the language. I brought that to the bill's sponsor, that was Senator Herndon, and it was kind of dismissed. It's like, well, we talked to some lawyers and they didn't think that was a big deal. And that's their own opinion. But that was where we may, for a good bill, say like, that's the opportunity to say, I think that you could add this. It would make it a little bit better, but sometimes there's some ownership to say, no, I don't want to do that. And I'm not calling any individual out, but there's just like this, no, my ideas are pretty good. I don't need to listen to you. It turns out that bill now is being reintroduced. So if there's some edits at that point, it's too late. You have to abandon that bill.
Start over.
Start over.
It's a
new RS,
new
print
bill
hearing.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a long it's a complicated process. We have to go through those steps. The other option is you can amend it on the 14th order. So that bill, let's go back to the bill process. That bill is being presented to the right committee. If they think it needs to be amended, they can send it to the 14th order, which is the amending order. That gets things much more complicated. That gets amended on the fly on the floor of the House or the Senate. That's a lot harder to do. It's best to just start over and then get it to committee with a do pass recommendation. So the committee votes on it. They hear testimony. Sometimes it involves agencies. And they'll be like, well, did you talk to this constituency? Did you talk to agriculture? Did you talk to the sportsmen? Did you talk to the, blah, 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 whoever might have an interest in this? Typically the best response is, yes, I talked to them, but oftentimes that might not be feasible or they didn't want to. The best bills, in my opinion, have the most input and everybody's kind of happy with it, but they'll vote on it. They'll do pass recommendation or they hold it, which is a more polite way of killing the bill, putting it in a drawer. They vote to hold it, or they can outright vote to just say, no, this is a do not pass recommendation. If it passes, then it goes to the floor of the body. So if you introduce on the Senate side, it goes to the Senate floor. And then they vote on it and switches over. It goes to the right committee on the House side. So then it goes to the Resource Committee, same process over again. And then it goes to the floor of the House. And then it goes to the governor for a signature. At every one of those stops, so it passes. So let's say it passes the first committee. You then start lobbying the body at large. That's when you get people to contact their own personal legislator who may not have been on that committee to say, like, we do or do not support this. Let's just say it's a bill we don't support. So you're like, kill it, kill it, kill it. And we're getting, that's at the grassroots level. We are in the building sort of amplifying. You've gotten emails saying that people don't support this bill. Yes. And they'll be like, yeah, I've gotten a few. And be like, well, we can give a little bit more contextual reasoning and discussion on that, talk strategy, whatever, if they're on our side or something like that. It's just sort of the grassroots. That's why it's so important for people to email, call legislators. Calls are always better, but because it validates that what we are saying is supported by the general public.
For sure.
Then it goes to the next committee. Then we start lobbying the committee again. If it's a bill we don't support, we're asking them to say, no, do not pass. If it passes, then we're going to the Senate floor or the House floor, whichever was one it didn't pass, or it passed through previously, the opposite one. And then if it passes that time through the floor again, the second floor, it goes to the governor's office. And then we're lobbying the governor to either pass or do not, or veto, to sign or veto, I should say.
2 major houses, introduces an RS, goes through committee, passed on to that house's floor before being transferred to the other house to repeat that cycle before being sent to the governor. At every one of those steps, there's an opportunity for public engagement. Often that's coming from us, but really coming on behalf of you and the sportsman engagement from around the state. And that's the importance of contacting local legislators. We are grateful to live in a state where we don't have the same population density as some others. And they're accessible. They're accessible, and also the percentage of the population reaching out to a representative is significantly higher.
Yeah,
10 people in
that's a big
Fremont
deal.
County is a much higher percentage of the population than it is in Chicago or
Yeah.
Los Angeles or
Yeah.
wherever. And I just think that's really important for folks to know. Like, there's a couple of different spheres of issues that we work on. I see it as two kind of lanes. Can we talk about what are some of the sectors, some of the work that should be covered by the legislature that is really important for IWF that we're looking out for, that we're working on? I'm kind of thinking of things like development.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about things like could be agricultural practices and think pesticides, water quality, things like that nature. What is in the normal wheelhouse to be expected?
Yeah.
It kind of covers our ground, even
Yeah.
though it's not
Yeah.
fish and game specific, and we'll get into why.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, before I answer that, there's trends in certain years. So, I mean,
Yeah,
we
good point.
see, there's certain things that relate to public lands, access to them. There's, sometimes private land conservation, and there's access to, or sorry, legislation regarding the use of conserving farmland, which is obviously more ag centric, but farmland is wildlife habitat, and if that gets developed, it's no longer. And
Better cows than condos.
Yeah, that's right. And houses are the last crop you'll ever grow. We got a few quips here.
Big shout out to whoever said that. I did not
Yeah.
make that up, so I stole that from somebody.
Give credit where it's due.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that we work on, and they sometimes come in trends. For instance, when I started in 2016, it was like the peak of the anti-public land fight, like Sagebrush Rebellion 2.0. We saw legislators, many of them are still around, really going after public lands. And they didn't, there's like, for instance, and some of them are in really insidious ways. Like, you might not see it on the surface, but there was a bill that was introduced several times over a few years, that was like no net loss of private property, which was like, okay, I don't know what that means. Why does that have anything to do with us?
Yeah, on its
But
face,
the point
it
is,
seems
like,
well-serving.
some landowners, when they are they're getting old, their kids don't want to inherit the ranch. They want to keep it open, and they don't want it to be sold necessarily. Whoever they might sell it to, they don't want to see them subdivide it, turn it into houses. They want to keep it open, this like Western sort of ethos. So they might donate it to the Bureau of Land Management or to the Forest Service with specific management stipulations. That would have stopped that. And that was coming from people who don't think public land should exist, period. But it was a private property rights violation, which,
even though it's the wishes of the private property owner that they are
donate to the public domain,
voicing that they're looking out for.
So it was the state. So these are people often who are like, light hand of government. I am super politically conservative. The government shouldn't tell you what to do. And they're like, actually, I'm going to tell you who you can and cannot donate your property to.
Sure.
Which is like, it's hypocritical, but I will not, and I cannot say that to a legislator, but it is. And so that is one way that an anti-public lands bill might manifest. It's like, on its surface, it's like it might not be there, but it was really to prevent the expansion of the public domain, public land ownership, which is like, we need, as sportsmen, public land to hunt and fish on, or at least like if we want to maintain what we have here in the West. If you want to try hunting and fishing in Texas, where there's 2% public land, tell me how fun that is to pay $10,000 to access a stream to fish brown trout, or to hunt for mule deer that are farmed in behind high fences. It sucks. That's why we love Idaho, right? Because it's access to public land. But these people don't really care. And it's like they let their sort of like, I don't think federal public lands should exist, and therefore I want to get rid of them. And here, as my power as a legislator, I'm going to take stabs at like death of 1,000 cuts kind of thing. That's, and so, but the anti-public lands movement, I mean, when it was peaking 2016 to 2019, IWF with our partners, and again, sometimes we disagree with our partners on issues, but we all agree that public lands are very valuable. We rallied. I mean, we had the largest political rally, environmental political rally in Idaho's history. We had the public lands rally in that was like 2008 18-ish or 17, it was massive. 3,000 people showed up outside the Capitol, people wearing blaze orange, people doing their elk bugle, guys carrying their kayaks, people carrying like fish nets, and then there was like the granola crowd, people carrying skis on their back. It was a really great display of like who values public lands. It's not one political party. These are people who want to get in the outdoors. It was awesome. But like there was an anti-public lands bill. It was trying to get a firm was trying to get Idaho to pay $8 million of taxpayer funds to fund their effort to sue the federal government for the existence of federal lands in the first place. It went to the Lincoln Auditorium. They had to move it to a bigger room because there were so many people who showed up. 300 something seats in the Lincoln Auditorium. And it was wall to wall, shoulder to shoulder. People were standing room only. They had to open up other things. We printed stickers that said, "Keep your hands off my public lands," with like blaze orange. I mean, like, it was a political statement, and that bill was crushed. And there were a number of those types of bills that were just attacks. And like, we largely delivered that, like, Idahoans do not fucking support this.
Yeah.
Stop doing this. And like, they stopped. I mean, we won. It's died
I mean,
off.
I remember that. Like, that was remarkable. I wasn't working for IWF yet, but like, even I was part of that. I was following along. That was a huge piece of momentum. But I do want to be careful though too. I think it's important to point out, and conservation in Idaho can be challenging. And during these spring sessions, we lose a lot of sleep, and it can be frustrating. But at the same time, we hold a unique space. As we do meet with, for better or for worse, sometimes we meet with legislators that are also Idahoans that enjoy that same kind of sporting heritage and do actively participate. It's not many of these legislators, our representative men and women, they're tuned in to a reasonable degree because they're familiar.
They listen to this podcast.
They're going to. Tune in episode 3, special guest. No, what I'm getting at is that there's a little bit of there is a opportunity for bipartisan agreement on values that are held and seen as Idahoan values. And I think that we have come around where a lot of social issues that are highly divided, and sure, federal lands may be a very contentious issue. There is a real opportunity, even if it's being used as a grandstand, for conservation to see a win, as to be an opportunity to where collective shared values can come together. I think that's important to voice out.
Yeah.
It's not all an entire uphill battle.
No. In a state like Idaho, at the state level, we play a lot of defense. Like, we're not an enviro org. We're a hunting and fishing organization. We're a conservation organization. In my opinion, conservation, hunting, fishing are all synonymous. But with the political makeup of Idaho, and this isn't a partisan statement, this is more like rural versus urban. There's some like the Sagebrush Rebellion, like Bundy support type things, like blow it up. We want government so small we can drown it in the bathtub. We end up playing a lot of defense on some of our issues more than we are proactive.
Yeah.
But it's true, but but if you talk to these people, they all want good fishing. They all want access to land to hunt and fish. And so sometimes it doesn't really square. It's like, well, then why do you support this like anti-public lands bill? And politics, I find, often gets in the way of like the value system. And that's sort of a result of kind of the political machine.
Thank you. Yeah. That's really where I was going, is that oftentimes it gets sucked into what are you called versus what do you value.
There's a bill that was just introduced this last week. It is February 6th today. It was introduced last week, and talking to some elected officials about the bill itself, they're like, well, I don't necessarily support it personally, but it's the chairman's bill, and the implication is.
So let's get into that. Let's get into that, and I think this deserves a little bit of an introduction, because we talked about public lands, we talked about habitat, we talked about kind of quality, water quality, things like that are integral to healthy fish and wildlife populations. That's where our intersect we're looking out for. What the legislature historically is not responsible for is things like regulations, rules, season setting that are set under management of Idaho Fish and Game.
Yeah, fish and game rules, fish and game,
Fish and
yeah,
game
yeah.
rules, and so they go through a public comment period. They are analyzed and crafted by expert staff, and then approved by a top of class kind of subject matter expert commission, an independent commission
That represents sportsmen,
which
politically
represents sportsmen. And we
represents-
talked about this in the first podcast, that this was largely birthed from the voter initiative that IWF was responsible
Hell
for.
yeah.
We're seeing more of that in the legislature. We're seeing this sort of crossover and sort of encroach upon the legislature. We're seeing legislators really extending their jurisdiction and crossing over, sometimes blatantly, enthusiastically, as the case of the bill that you just presented. Can you talk a little bit, before we get into the specifics of that bill as an example, what does that encroachment on that autonomous Fish and Game Commission look like, and why is that so important to IWF? Because this is something that we have harped on and that we will continue to.
Yeah.
This is a hill that we will die on.
Yeah.
But
what
is
that?
Yeah.
Okay, so typically when it comes to wildlife management, which this commission form of making management decisions for wildlife swept the country through the 1930s, and the idea was that we're going to have science dictate how we set our seasons, what harvest methods we can use, and we're going to set seasons as well based on a biological response. So if a certain unit, we have a rifle hunt that's killing a bunch of elk, we're going to look at that and say, like, well, we harvested a bunch, so next year we need to either shorten the season or we need to reduce the number of tags. So it's like people who get wildlife and science and then know how to then change how we harvest them the following year, that kind of relationship, should be making those decisions. And that's a part of the Northwest model of wildlife conservation, which has several tenets, but it's basically like the foundation of it is scientists, people who understand it, should be making these decisions, not voters at the ballot box. We've seen that play out in Colorado recently, who they want to introduce wolves. They're like, well, let's put the voters, let's let them decide. Not a wise idea, because the average Colorado voter is not an ecologist or wildlife relations specialist,
or live in spaces that are impacted by those, by those wild.
Or we see places like California or Washington where legislators are saying, I don't think we should be able to harvest mountain lions anymore. They're not managers, because they have a warm fuzzy relationship, usually through a screen, with those animals, and so they think it's cruel or something like that. But then the effects that they maybe didn't know about, because they're not experts, again, is that now you're seeing an explosion of cats, and then you're seeing depredation or kills on dogs, on cows, on other animals, and now they're paying government shooters to go in there and reduce the mountain lion population, whereas that population was sort of regulated because of the science-based management through hunting and fishing, or through hunting in that specific instance. So that's the sort of commission model, and that's where decisions have always lied best. And it's not perfect. People often disagree with it, but generally in the United States, we have really good opportunity compared to literally everywhere else in the world.
Sure.
So it may not be, people can gripe about it here and there. There's small tweaks that, we can make, but by and large, it works.
I mean, you hear about it all the time. I was just actively following, the state of Washington trying to ban all wild game furs and things we use, the impacts that would have on anglers in my, the fly fishing community, and tying your own fly. I mean, these are the most historically valuable things that are not the cause of decline on biological levels of wildlife. Yet it's being held responsible because of, and special interest is a term that gets thrown around a lot, but these are behind the scenes, and these are animal rights, and this is ballot box biology at its finest, and it's occurring on a regular basis in states around us, and we're unfortunately starting to see it here.
So we're seeing an erosion.
And we're at the forefront of that.
We're seeing a total erosion of this respect for game managers, scientists making these decisions, and politicians inserting themselves from both political parties. I know when you're a
Kind of sounds like special interest.
yeah. And so it's like, it's not unique to one party. I think that's really important for everyone to understand.
Yeah.
It's
There's two sides to this coin.
yes, yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, and we are seeing that in Idaho. It's manifesting itself in ways that, you know, politicians want a thing done, and they're going to utilize the entire legislative apparatus to change something that should be left up to experts, or should be left up to, like, let sportsmen weigh in. That's the other thing that commission form of government does. Like, when there's a change that they want to make, it's scoped to the public. It's scoped mostly to the sporting public, but anybody can comment.
Sure.
But sportsmen typically are the ones who weigh in. So
And people like IWF and our partners are sharing all of that.
Yeah.
We're trying to responsibly
we
share
want-
that
yeah.
information out. We are encouraging the general sporting public to contribute their thoughts.
to management decisions. I don't know where sportsmen stand on a lot of issues, and that's IWF is like, we'll just amplify it and say, like, hey, it's this fishing season setting for Chinook or for cutthroat, whatever, or like the trout. There's, you know, here's this. We want to know where people stand on these issues, because that's a part of our hunting and fishing heritage. This North American model too is like, it's, what does the science say the populations, the fish and wildlife populations can handle, but also what's the social science of where, you know, sportsmen land on these issues, so we can kind of implement seasons that, yeah, utilize these game species in a productive way as well. People, yeah. So,
Well, and because we were talking about the North American model, and the first tenet, and I think there's 6 or 7, and forgive me, I don't have them all memorized like with top of my head, but like the first one is that all wildlife is within the shared public trust. And so therefore, what sort of access opportunity should be determined and finally determined by that commission based on science guidance. However, like how those are sort of allotted, allocated is a decision to be decided by the public trust, but
Yeah.
not one person,
So,
certainly. And,
yeah.
and I think this is probably a good point to, like, why don't we just start like giving this legs? And like, we're talking about a bill that's happening right now underneath our feet. You know, it's early February. So not sure when you're listening to this podcast, but let's just like bring this to life.
Yeah.
This is happening. I'm working on
Right now.
this afternoon.
Yeah, this is there has been a trend in recent years of legislators stepping in to set season setting policy. And season setting is not just like, you know, you can hunt spring bear from this date to this date. It's also harvest method, the technology that we can use to actually harvest these animals. It's not like, I think when people think season setting, it's like, well, what days do I get to hunt? It's also like, you know, if you increase technology, say for bow hunting, you allow like automatic pin adjusters to, like, so if you're looking at an elk through your bow and the sight says it's 120 yards and adjust your pin for you, you're much more successful. The more successful you make some of these primitive hunts, the biological response of Fish and Game is going to have to be to reduce season, so there's less harvest or reduction of tags. So we actually see a real world response to the increase. We've had legislators in recent years saying like, well, I want to hunt with mechanical broadheads, lighted nocks. I want to hunt with, like, I want to modernize muzzle loaders so that when I'm hunting with my muzzle loader, I want to be able to do these things. I want to turn my 90-yard, you know, range muzzleloader into a 300+ yard, like essentially turning it into a rifle. But they get their special season, so it's like, well, now it's like, well, maybe we need to take away that special season if it's not actually a primitive weapon. So I'm all to say that we are seeing a trend of legislators kind of bucking this commission form. They should be responsible, make these decisions, because they're just like, for whatever reason, and they want to do it. And the problem with it is sportsmen. One of the problems, sportsmen are really used to commenting on season setting, these like tech advancements, or commenting on how we can harvest things through an established state process through the commission.
Sure.
We get thousands and thousands of comments of how we should manage things through that process,
Because it's been that way for decades.
and that's the way it's supposed to be. That's why we founded the commission. That's the foundation we know. But now legislators, when they introduce a bill, there's no John Q. sportsmen showing up to testify in front of a committee. One, they're at work. And they have that day.
You're only serving your other
Business
representatives and senators. That's really all the input that you need.
The public participation, you know, scoping through Fish and Game takes weeks. You have weeks to make your comments. When it comes to the legislature, you have a day. You have to show up at that meeting time. And that's just, we don't have that ability to do that. People work. And so it kind of just, you don't see sportsmen weighing in at the legislative process, and they just pass bills like that, bam, fast. We didn't hear anybody disagree. Just this one group showed up. So it's like, it's kind of also a way to just like invalidate maybe where the public stands on this issue. But go ahead. If
Go ahead, finish. Why don't you finish this, and we'll, because
no,
I'm
that's
gonna
it.
follow it up.
That's really it. And but there is the bill that we're working on right now that is in that same vein. Representative Mendive, who also happens to be the chair of the House Resources Committee, and it also happens to be his last legislative session. He's a muzzleloader hunter. He hunts during the muzzleloader season, which is a special season granted to those folks because, there's less harvest with a muzzleloader. It's harder to hunt. That means that so that opportunity exists because of the primitive nature. There was scoping done last year, and one of the questions it was asked, do you support using, 209 primers, pelletized powder, and sobits, which is these are all things that go into, loading a muzzle loader, but it essentially increases the efficiency of the weapon and increases the range drastically.
Mm-hmm.
And sportsmen, through the scoping of Fish and Game, only like 9% of sportsmen favored adding those things to the muzzleloader season.
91% of
Opposed.
sportsmen opposed
91% of sportsmen
that are now being
opposed.
proposed
Yep,
in the legislature.
But the chairman of the resource committee wants this. And so he's circumventing the authority of what many people view as the authority of Fish and Game, and have for about 80 plus years, despite where sportsmen stand on this issue. And he's like, no, it's going to happen. And basically the wording of the bill says Fish and Game shall not make any rules or regulations that make these things illegal or you can't use them. And that sucks because that's in code. He's using the entire state apparatus. If we ever think that biologically we've gone too far, it's killing too many elk, Fish and Game cannot then say, well, okay, we went too far with these, we should move it back. Their only ability is to introduce another bill, which will be really hard to pass, or they're gonna shorten the season, because what you're gonna see is increased harvest success rates, and the only response Fish and Game is going to be tied to is shortening that muzzleloader season for all muzzleloader users,
Sure.
or reducing tags. That's why the flexibility of the commission form of wildlife management gives them to say, well, this year we're going to try it, and we didn't like the biological response, and sportsmen by and large don't want to reduce tags, so we're going to actually take the ability away to use sobits, 209 primers, pelletized powder. So it's not a good way to set policy.
And this is a great, like, where this was all going is that when you see what generally I'm writing with the help of my colleagues here at IWF, when we're putting out these kind of informative blogs or calls to action to sort of push back on this encroachment on the Autonomous Commission and Fish and Game's kind of management structure, the idea really isn't to get into the weeds on the specifics of that this particular change or this particular technological, now while we can have our own thoughts on tech creep and different things like that, like that's a discussion for us to have with Fish and Game. And I get asked a lot, they're like, oh, well, like, aren't you going to actually say anything about broadheads? Are you going to say anything about actually talk about muzzleloaders? Like, no, the idea really is that this isn't the business of the legislature, and that we're pushing back on this even being entered into the space. I just think that's like really 30,000 foot. That's the absolute priority for us, is to keep this out of the building.
Right. So, during the mechanical broadheads lighted Knox discussion 2 years ago, that was legislation that was brought. No sportsman showed up to really testify in favor of it. It was just one guy who had a really good relationship with the legislator up north. He's like, I want this. And then they went through and pushed it. But when we talked about it online, the discourse was, well, I want lighted Knox and broadheads, and that's fine.
We might too.
But Federation doesn't have a stance on that. We don't have a stance on these issues with the muzzleloader thing. But the problem is we're introducing political management into wildlife management, which is why we created the commission in the first place, because that got out of hand. And frankly, a lot of those people who, and I know some of those folks are friends of mine. They're like, well, I've always wanted mechanical broadheads. I've always wanted lighted Knox, so I'm going to support this bill. It's like, do you support the California legislature banning mountain lion hunting? Do you think that's appropriate for that body to make? Or would you rather have left in science's hands and with the commission, who would say, well, the science says that we can actually sustain the lion population? They largely will say, no, I don't think that's appropriate for them. So I think even if you support the changes of these bills, it's really important to kind of zoom out a little bit. And if this was using against you and something you didn't like, is it appropriate? And the answer is no. Let the commission suss this out. And I mean, it's just, that's where it should be made. And I think that's where it's mostly appropriate.
For sure.
It's a double-edged sword.
So we're obviously working on that bill that was brought forth by the chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee. We are working on a couple of other bills that we have lightly touched on. I do think that while we're kind of holding this space for this year's legislative action, what are those other bills? And can we talk a little bit about our kind of our stance and summaries of those? Because why don't we actually start with the one that was introduced yesterday? The Kingsley, yes, a couple of them are different, but the Kingsley bill that was brought forward yesterday into the same committee is very, very, very similar, a little more nuanced.
Same vein.
But same vein. Can you talk about that one?
Yeah, Representative Kingsley out of District 7 up in northern Idaho introduced a bill that would mandate the Fish and Game Department and Commission go through the season setting process only for elk, deer, and moose every year, as opposed to every 2 years, which is what it's done now. And, you know, that was a change that was made in about 2015. We used to do it every year, but and this is just what I've heard. This is not my opinion, but the department felt that it takes a lot of resources, a ton of staff time, a ton of sportsman dollars. Fish and Game Department is not funded by any taxpayer dollars. That's important for folks to know. It's funded by our license and fees dollars. So, that it takes a lot of resources to do the season setting. And if we did it every single year, but they started to notice that there wasn't really a biological change that was so abrupt that we needed to do season setting every year, that you could do it every 2 years and that was enough. However, that doesn't mean they can't do it.
This is really interesting. And I actually had not really thought about this before, but they already have the capacity to take actions, emergency actions, if they need to.
Yeah. So season setting involves like public scoping. It's a long process, like I said, and you can get the general, like, here's what we want to do. But if things happen, if there's like a disease outbreak, they don't have to wait 2 years to change the season. So and think about Chinook seasons. During the Chinook season, those are day-to-day decisions. The 2-year season setting process on fishing regulations does not impact their ability to be to move fast. So I think this is coming from a political place that just says like, well, I think that they should do that, but it doesn't seem like it was vetted with the sporting community. I can't find a single sportsman group that was talked to about this or whether they do or do not support this. But again, it's lawmakers coming from a political standpoint, just saying, I think this is the way it should be done. But the biologists and the people who run the show are saying like, it doesn't really need to be done that. Plus we already get at what the intent of the bill is doing, like this current process. But that's, again, it's ignorance of the existing process that pushed this legislator to Kingsley to do that. Unfortunately, I mean, I just don't think it's a good bill. But the other two bills, they're drastically different. I think this gives a good flavor of like the kind of different stuff we work on. You know, one bill closes a loophole in wildlife violations. So as it stands currently, if you poach an animal or you're behaving in some other way that's illegal, and you get fined, like a misdemeanor and a fine, right now, if you haven't paid that fine, if you go to a point of sale system, so a gas station where you can buy a fishing license or hunting license, you can just get another one and you can just go on not paying that fine. But you still get to maintain your right to hunt and fish by just buying a license. This closes that loophole. And so what it would do is if this bill passes, you can go to a point of sale system. Hopefully a little red flag comes up and says, I can't sell this to you unless you pay the fine like right now, or go into Fish and Game, pay the fine. That's actually good. Like most hunters do not like poachers, and poachers should not be rewarded with poaching by continuing to hunt and fish.
Not to mention the systems seem like they're already there. They're just not communicating.
Yeah. So easy. That's an easy slam dunk. Let's push that through so folks have to pay.
And then we talked about the right of way public access,
the access bill,
which is mainly you were suggesting, and we had sort of pushed for some clarifying language surrounding the exchange needing to be a similar or higher quality access, right?
Yeah, the original bill said, like, you know, if a county is going to shut down a road that provides access to a body of water, it has to provide identical access to that same body of water. My concern was, well, let's say the city, like a county over by Salmon, Idaho, is going to shut down access to the river. They could argue with the language of the original bill. Well, there's access to the Salmon River in Riggins, so go drive 400 miles. And obviously, like, but that's how the bills are literal. You can't, like, you have to be exacting with your language. I expressed that concern. Like I said, they didn't. No one. A few people in the room didn't agree with that, and now it turns out like they got some opinions from people they trust, or whoever, a lawyer that said, yeah, that's about validity. So they've kind of nipped that language in the bud, so it's a little bit better. And the new bill has been introduced, and we'll be supporting that one as well.
I think that's 1258. You can see that on the bill tracker. Just
Senate
updated
Bill
that
1258.
one. Just updated that a couple days ago. Also, not to pick on the city of Salmon. We don't know that the city of Salmon would ever.
Well, it'd
do
be the
that to
county
people
that Salmon's in, anyways.
Yeah, true.
And I forget the name of the county over there. I'm so sorry. But there's other bills. You know, we're watching, obviously, the fish and game budget is something we care about. Department of Land's budget, Parks and Rec budget. So we watch some of the more administrative bills that come through that are all the budget bills. Because if you look at, let's just say, the fish and game budget, there's a lot of good things in there that are line items that we support. Some legislators might look at them and say, I don't like that thing, so I want to pull it out. So we defend that too if those instances arise. Yeah.
And we largely take care. I say we take care of those. Like, we work on those and we inform you as they progress through. But in our usual, I'm going to hog the mic for a second and talk a little bit about the structure that we have, because we talked a lot about at the opening of the podcast about how this is a relatively alien subject to a lot of general sporting public. And while we want everybody to be more familiar and civically active and to feel enabled and engaged, we don't look to make this your responsibility. So we work really hard to build a program that makes this as easy as possible access. And we have a couple of different ways that we do that. We have a bill tracker on our website. There is the Idaho Wildlife Bill Tracker. There's a link on the top left there. And there you can see literal up-to-the-minute updates on the progress of the bills that we have prioritized that you need to know about. In the news section on the website, and what you'll commonly see on our social media channels, is going to be a little bit more of the depth. It's going to be the news on the bills as they progress, a little bit more of the characters and the voices, so that you can get a little bit more of the flavor of these bills as they go through the process. It's also where you're going to find any of your action alerts, where we are really going to cover bills that we need to take action on positively or negatively. If we're taking action, we're going to really do a deep dive, and we're going to provide a form or some contacts to enable sportsmen to really take action where they're needed. On that subscribe button on the website, and I know I'm talking about something that's on a screen that nobody's looking at, so I don't want to get us too lost, but we work pretty hard to make a system where we have a newsletter specifically dedicated to, it could be multiple times a day. If you want to get everything you need to know and nothing you don't, you can get sent those emails, that newsletter for our legislative updates that I make sure that we get out as soon as I possibly can as news hits out of the State House. Those are for the folks that want absolutely everything. We don't want to spam you. If you don't want it, we don't want to send it to you. If you do, we have something that really works for you. And of course, as Brian loves to do, I know that you love spending your Fridays, we do our weekly legislative recaps, which are quick format videos that if you have no time during your work week, which we completely understand, you can catch up for 2 or 3 minutes, everything that you need to know that happened in the State House that week. We put those on YouTube, which is a pretty widespread platform at this point. These podcasts aren't going to be done frequent enough to do those. Oh, almost lost my coffee off the table. And so those are going to be on YouTube as well as our social channels, and we email those out as well. I don't think I missed anything, but again, we make this, we work hard to do the work for you and to get you the information that you need to know.
Without
Please take us up
overspamming.
on that, without overdoing it.
Yeah.
Not everybody wants everything, but if you do, please know that we're here for you.
We'll give it to you.
For the sake of time, let's wrap it up. And I think we've got some work to do on some bills that we need to cover. I've got some writing and reporting to do, which I really enjoy digging in. It brings me back to my heyday of reporting. And I don't know if you enjoy getting into the State House as much, but we're getting in there. It's heating up a little bit quicker than we expected, and we're here for you.
Yeah,
So
hoping for a regular length legislative session so they get back home to campaigning for the primary. That'd be great.
My birthday's over Memorial Day weekend, and so I'm always got my eyes on the prize of making sure that we're out of there by then. If we're not, it's a bad year.
Oh my God. End of March, please.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Yep. Take care.
Then I was supposed to be, but the walls froze through and shattered. I'm partially peaceful,